Another week, and we have 2 books remaining in the Scary Stories for Sleepovers series. And I can't wait to get through them. Hope everybody's having a good week. The chat is already taunting me. Tony Marr said, hope you have a nice trip. We'll see you next fall. So, I had to take the studio apart, not to ruin your immersion that I'm not in the woods. But I had to take the studio apart to do a photo shoot yesterday. And I fell right through the backdrop and almost onto a bunch of really expensive lighting equipment. I'm okay. My back's a little sore. But you know, I'm fine otherwise. But no, please make all of the jokes you want. I think that that's only fair. After all, if the chat can't exist to make a bunch of jokes, then what good are you guys? Let's see. Craig Cohen said, hello, good evening, Henrik. Hello, Craig, and thank you for being our numero uno tip of the evening. That's right. By the way, in case you weren't aware, I think everybody is at this juncture. Tips are not required, but they are appreciated. You can see the info at the bottom of the screen. Morgan Moore said, live from the woods. Fair. Tony Marr said, I'm sorry, I hope you're all right. Don't worry about that. Shane Migliavacca said, damn, I'm glad you're okay. I'm just fine. It wasn't a big fall. It was just one of those things where I fell and realized I was fine, and then I was like, oh yeah, I should really be a lot more careful moving a bunch of like heavy equipment stuff around by myself, alone in the house. Probably a good idea. Either that or I should get life alert. So, but I am perfectly fine. So no worries there, my friends. Let's see. Okay, we're doing good. So, I guess here in a moment, I'm just going to jump into yet another scary story from even more scary stories for sleepovers. This one's been really good the last few weeks. Let's see. Tony Marr said, I have a dad card. I'm allowed to use terrible jokes. Shane Migliavacca said, please don't tip over again. Oh, okay. And then Monica Vieira said, hi. Hello, Monica. Welcome, and hope you have some fun. So let's start the first story, and then we can talk more about my incompetence and my ability to harm myself. But we've got a scary story. Keith Tomlin said, I've fallen and I can't get up. Katie Lynn Wolf said, yay. Hello, Katie. So let's get into the first story, and then we can make fun of me to all of your heart's contents. So this story, my friends, this story is called The Invitation. Even though she had only seen photographs of Aunt Judith, Caitlin felt sorry when her dad told her that the old woman had passed away. After all, she was a relative, no matter how distant. Why didn't we ever visit her? She asked. She was your grandmother's eldest sister, Kate, he explained. Caitlin knew that Grandma Angelica was the youngest in a family of 10 children. They were never especially close, her father continued. They hardly ever saw each other, even before Judith's daughter disappeared. Kate looked up with renewed curiosity. You never told me about that. Her mom stopped packing clothes into the suitcase that lay open on the bed. It happened a long time ago, she said. More than 40 years, in fact. I suspect that the reason Judith left her estate to us is because you're about the age her daughter was the last time she saw her. I certainly can't imagine another reason, her father commented dryly. Aunt Judith wasn't any nicer to us than she was to anyone else in the family. What happened to her daughter? Caitlin questioned. Her dad shook his head. I don't know. It's some deep, dark family secret. Maybe she just ran away. I don't think we'll ever know for certain, but I do know one thing. A smile crept across his face. If you don't get packed, young lady, you won't be ready for the flight tomorrow. Then your mom and I will just have to leave you here while we check out our inheritance, all by ourselves. Kate giggled. I'll be ready. What do you think it's like, Dad? I don't know, he answered, but we'll certainly find out tomorrow. The plane trip from Wyoming to Vermont had been fun, and Kate was enjoying the taxi ride from the airport. They had been driving for almost an hour in some of the most beautiful countryside she'd ever seen. Every so often, though, through the wide gaps in the forest of trees that grew almost to the edge of the highway, she caught a glimpse of a shimmering river. "It's fabulous, Dad," she said excitedly. "Do you think the house is close to the river?" The letter said it was. "Look," he said, pointing out the window. "See for yourself." As the taxi rounded a curve in the road, a rambling Tudor-style home came into view. It was perched on a small rise that descended in a sweep of grass to the riverbank. "It's lovely," her mom said softly, "like a picture postcard." When the taxi pulled up to the old home, it became clear that the place was not exactly perfect. Even in the deepening twilight, the signs of neglect were obvious. Still, Kate couldn't wait to explore. As soon as her bags were safely in her room and on the first floor, she ran outside. Standing on the back patio, she could see the calm, gray-green river snaking along at the base of the rise. An old boathouse that seemed on the verge of collapse extended a short way out from the bank. To the left, she could see another small building. "That must be the carriage house," she said aloud to herself. The lawyer who was helping to settle the estate had told her parents that Aunt Judith had converted the structure to a tiny apartment. A rather surly old man named Howard had lived there for as long as anyone could remember. Howard claimed to have a skin condition that was aggravated by sunlight, so he kept pretty much to himself. But he did have the habit of roaming around late into the night. It was getting dark now, but Caitlin wanted to get a closer look at the boathouse. She started to crunch along the hedge-lined gravel path down the hill. "Where do you think you're going?" a gruff voice called out, startling her. She wheeled around to face a pale, drawn-looking man. "You have no business out here," he said, squinting down at her. "I can be anywhere I like," she answered back, trying to appear sure of herself. "My family owns this place." "So you're the new ones," he snarled. "Well, don't say I didn't warn you." He stomped away toward the carriage house. "Well," Kate mumbled, "pleased to meet you too." Within a week, Caitlin and her parents had accomplished wonders with the old estate. It was much cheerier already, so her mom had decided to throw a party to get to know the locals and thank everyone for their help. Caitlin thought it was a great idea, but now, as she helped her mom refill trays of party snacks and listened to the guests talking mostly about the upcoming elections for town council, she lost her enthusiasm. It seemed that no one had kids her age. Finally, one conversation caught her attention. Caitlin settled on the couch next to her dad, who was talking to the woman who ran the dry goods store. She was telling him about the disappearance of Aunt Judith's daughter. "Actually, she was only the first to disappear," the woman was saying. "Since then, quite a few people have vanished. Oh, sure, many of them were transients. You know, take a job, work for a while, then move on. That could explain some of the disappearances, but not all. But Judith's girl, well, she was kind of wild." She lifted her eyebrows and looked at Kate. "Nothing like this dear child here." Kate cast a glance at her dad that said, "Give me a break." "What do you think happened to her?" her father asked, ignoring Caitlin and trying not to laugh. "Well, I imagine she just ran off," said the woman. "There was this circus troupe in town. A very odd group of people, never did actually put on a circus. Well, when they moved on, the girl was gone too." Kate smiled politely. "I think I'll go outside for some air," she announced, heading for the patio. It was a lovely early summer evening. Kate gazed out at the river, and once again the boathouse aroused her curiosity. She had been so busy for the past few days that she hadn't made the time to check it out. "No one would miss me if I slipped away and explored for just a few minutes," she thought. The door to the old wooden structure wasn't locked, but the rusty hinges squeaked pitifully as she pushed it open. Once inside, Caitlin wished she had brought along a flashlight. She could barely make out the shape of the dock that extended into the water. Kate stood silently and listened to the water lapping gently at the sodden timbers. The air smelled of damp earth. She stepped toward the dock, and the aging boards creaked under her feet. Suddenly, she felt something brushing across her cheek. With a yelp, she jumped back and put her hand to her face. "Gross!" she said. "Spider webs." Concentrating on brushing the sticky strands from her hair, she was unaware of the pale hand that reached out toward her from the gloom. The long fingers were only inches from her when she turned her head, hearing her mom calling for her from the house. Knowing she really shouldn't be away from the party, Kate scrambled for the door and raced back up the hill. A moment later, Howard stepped from the shadows beside the hedge. He stared toward the main house as Caitlin disappeared inside. The next morning, Kate was curled up in a big, cozy chair near her bedroom window, writing a letter to her best friend. She glanced out to watch the full moon rise grandly over the horizon. Then she noticed a small figure near the boathouse. It appeared to be a young girl. Kate quickly opened the heavy white French doors that led from her room to the patio. She stepped outside to get a better look. The boathouse door was just swinging shut. "Who could that be?" she asked under her breath. Grabbing a flashlight from her nightstand, she made her way down to the riverbank. She edged through the open door, switched on the flashlight, and gasped. The beam fell on a girl her own age. She was sitting on the edge of the dock with her bare feet dangling in the cool, dark water. "I was hoping you'd come," the girl said without turning. Kate didn't move. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Colleen." The girl stood and turned, smiling. "I live in the big green house just down the river. Do you know it?" Kate nodded that she did. "My parents have forbidden me to come here, but when I heard that you had moved in, I just had to. When school's out, there's nobody around here to talk to. I thought maybe we could just be secret friends. My folks wouldn't have to know." Kate relaxed and studied the girl for a moment. "Why don't your mom and dad want you to come here?" Colleen looked down at the water. "Because of all the things that have happened, and because of Howard." She looked up again into Kate's eyes. "He's a vampire, you know," she said seriously. "What?" Kate couldn't help but giggle. He's weird, all right, but he's harmless. Did your parents tell you he was a vampire?" "No," Colleen answered solemnly. "Ms. Judith did." In bed that night, Caitlin couldn't fall asleep. She kept thinking about all of the strange things that Colleen had told her. How she befriended Aunt Judith when everyone else thought she was just a crazy old lady. How Howard had come to town with the circus 40 years before, and for some unknown reason had decided to stay. How Aunt Judith had convinced her that Howard was one of the undead and had been responsible for her own daughter's horrible death to satisfy his thirst for blood. Colleen claimed that the reason Aunt Judith had tolerated Howard's presence was so that she could gather proof against him. More importantly, she had vowed to find his coffin, burn it, and so avenge her daughter. According to Colleen, once the coffin was destroyed, the vampire's evil existence would end. "Now that Miss Judith is gone," Colleen had whispered, "it's up to me to find the coffin and burn it." "That's ridiculous," Caitlin had scoffed. "There's no such thing as vampires." "If you want proof, you can read all about it in Miss Judith's private papers," Colleen had assured her. "They're in a small wooden packing chest she kept at the end of her bed." Before Caitlin left the boathouse, she had promised to meet her new friend the following night. Knowing that her parents would be out for the evening, she told Colleen they could meet in the house. At breakfast the next morning, Kate asked her parents if they had seen a packing chest in Aunt Judith's room. "Yes, it was filled with old papers and books," her dad told her. "It's in the attic now with the rest of her things." "Why?" Caitlin smiled sweetly. "I'm just curious about her. Do you think it would be okay if I take a look?" Her dad shrugged. "Be my guest." Moments later, Kate was sitting in the attic with the chest open in front of her and piles of papers scattered on the floor. Colleen had been right. The chest was filled with letters, old photos of Aunt Judith and various people, and books on vampire legends, as well as newspaper articles about local disappearances. Caitlin opened a very ornate book and read from one of the pages. "Capable of taking many forms, such as an animal or a puff of smoke, but they may not enter a home in any form unless they are invited. The undead are capable of inhuman strength, but they are nevertheless vulnerable. They cannot survive in the light of day." She stopped, remembering how Howard supposedly had a disease that prevented him from going out in the sun. She continued to read, "And a vampire must return to its coffin by sunrise, or cease to exist." Kate let the book drop to her lap. This can't be true. Then her gaze fell on something in the chest that glinted in the dim attic light. It was a small silver picture frame. She took it out and held it cupped in one hand. The frame was decorated with clusters of tiny silver roses, but the glass was broken and the picture was missing. She took the beautiful old frame and a few of the books, thinking that Colleen might want to see them. That evening, Caitlin said goodbye to her parents when they left for town. Then she opened the French doors in her bedroom. She was busy studying one of the books she had found when she had the creepy feeling that she was being watched. Looking up, Kate was startled to see Colleen just standing at the open door. "You scared me," Caitlin laughed nervously. "Why are you just standing out there? You should see this. I'm still not sure I believe in vampires, but..." Colleen took a step. Then suddenly from the darkness outside came a horrible cry. "No!" Howard screamed, hurling himself at Colleen and dragging her to the ground. "Help!" The struggling girl screamed. "Caitlin, help me!" Without thinking, Kate picked up the nearest thing, a table lamp, and threw it at the old man. It glanced off the side of his head. He released his hold on Colleen and she scrambled away from him. Rolling to one side, Howard labored to rise to his feet. Then he stumbled toward Kate. Blood oozed from a wound on his head where the lamp had struck him. "Get away from me," she warned. "I know what you are. You're a vampire." Sliding her hands across the nightstand, she found the flashlight and held it up threateningly. Please," he moaned, holding out a small square of paper to her. His words rushed out in short gasps. "It isn't me. My brother, he was killed by a vampire. It was traveling with that dreadful circus. They were actually protecting it. I found out about them and destroyed the monster. But it was too late. The girl, she was already infected by the evil." The old man tried to steady himself against the table. "And all of these years, Judith guarded her, even though she knew what she had become. I couldn't." His feet buckled under him. He fell unconscious to the ground. Kate knelt by his side and pressed a t-shirt to his bleeding head. She looked up at Colleen, who was still standing in the doorway. "We were wrong, Colleen. He's no vampire. Help me." "What do you want me to do?" Colleen answered in a strange tone. "The telephone is over there. Call for help," Kate said. "Are you inviting me in?" asked Colleen, her voice oddly calm for the situation. "Yes, of course. I want you to come in," Kate said frantically. "How else can you..." Just then, Kate took the paper from Howard's limp hand. It was a photograph. She stared in astonishment at the old photo. It was of a fairly young Aunt Judith in a 50s style dress. Standing next to her was a girl. "It can't be!" Caitlin gasped as Colleen slowly stepped over the threshold. "This is a picture of you! But how? Everyone thought you were dead!" "Something like that," Colleen said, smiling and showing her fangs. Kate cowered helplessly in the corner. "Stay away!" she begged. "It's too late," Colleen hissed. "You've already invited me in." And with that, she rushed at the screaming girl. Not bad, a little vampire. We don't get a whole lot of vampires in these books. And that was a pretty good one. Let's see what you guys are saying. First of all, thank you so much, Shane Migliavaca, for your very generous tip. I super appreciate it. Very, very much. Thank you, my friend. And let's see what you're saying in the chat. We got... Oh, boy, you guys were saying a whole lot. Let's see. Keith Tomlin, make fun of me to your heart's content. Finally, I'm in. Let's see. Heather Fairchild said, hey, Heather. Tony Marr, always blaming circus folk, right? Those poor carnies. What did they ever do? Shane Migliavaca said, vampire circus. Tony Marr said, wait, now I'm confused. Circus folk vampires? That would have been nice, but hold on. Morgan Moore said, so, proto Cirque de Freak? John Oak Dalton said, always a welcome night. Thank you, John, for joining us. Tony Marr said, capable of taking many forms, like an animal, a puff of smoke, or a midget clown. Shane Migliavaca, no! The store's out of toilet paper. And then Michelle said, uh-oh, Colleen's a vampire. Shane Migliavaca said, kind of reminds me of The Howling Six. You and me may be the only people who have ever seen The Howling Six. And you're kind of right. And then Craig Cohen said, invited in, you're doomed. So, my friends, before we do the next story, I'm going to get a little drink of water. So I'm sure you guys have you all gotten over your laughs about me having my fall? I hope so, because, you know, you're all bullies. So I guess, you know, when we finish this book, we then have one more Scary Stories for Sleepovers book. And after this book has been read, I probably am going to take a few weeks off, and then we'll decide on a new book to read. But for now, we still got some spookies right here. I'm going to try my best to keep the stories we read family friendly, because a lot of people seem to like to watch and listen with their kids. So, let's see what the next story is. All right. Ooh. This story, this title's got my curiosity piqued. This story is called Camp Colby. Jake stood grinning in the warm early morning sunshine. He really liked the first day of camp, and he really liked Camp Colby. This would be his second summer here, nestled on the shores of a crystal clear lake high in the Sierra Nevada mountains. Camp Colby had everything. There was horseback riding, boating, sailing, hiking, and plenty of other activities. Jake wanted to do everything. "Hey, Jake," someone called. He turned around and squinted at somebody running in his direction. "Eli!" Jake shouted out, recognizing his friend and bunkmate from the year before. Eli skidded to a stop on the gravel path. "Did you just get here? Wait until you see the new boat dock. What cabin are you in?" "Red Wing," Jake answered. "Whoa, you're kidding! Me too! It's a really cool cabin!" Eli gabbed on enthusiastically about how much fun they were going to have, about the horse he hoped they'd let him ride, and about some of the guys he'd already met. "There's a kid named Adam whose dad is in the astronaut program," he said, hardly taking a breath. "Come on, I'll introduce you around." Jake followed his chattering friend up the steep path to the woodland cabin. It was as cool as Eli had said it was. It had a raised porch in the front with a rough string hammock tied between two posts. Inside were 6 comfortable bunks and plenty of room for everyone's gear. One by one, his bunkmates, Adam, Charles, and Scott, introduced themselves to Jake. "And I'm Tim," a slightly deeper voice boomed from behind Jake. Jake turned around to see a tall teenage boy leaning against the open doorway. "I'll be your counselor," Tim said with a pleasant smile. "Now, if everyone has put away their things, we have to go down to the cafeteria for orientation. Come on, let's get it over with so we can start really having fun." Once all the kids were seated at the rows of long wooden tables, Mr. Ames, the camp director, explained the camp rules. Jake happily recalled that there weren't very many rules at all, and most were just for safety's sake. "Finally," Mr. Ames announced, "those of you who have been here before know that this was once a mining area. It's been a very long time since the mine has been worked, and it's quite deserted. Still, the entrance to the main shaft is open. It can be very dangerous, and I don't want any of you to go near it." Jake noticed that Tim seemed to stiffen a little and looked strangely uncomfortable while Mr. Ames was talking. "Is that clear?" the director continued. "That area is off limits," he said sternly, then smiled and changed his tone. "Now, let me end by saying, welcome to Camp Colby!" A general cheer sounded. That evening, the kids from Red Wing and 2 other cabins gathered around a shared campfire. A full moon sailed overhead. One of the camp cooks, a grizzly old fellow nicknamed Badger, had brought up a supply of hot dogs and marshmallows. He invited himself to join in the cookout and entertained the boys with funny stories that he made up as he went along. "Can you make up ghost stories too?" Charles asked, placing his third hot dog on the end of his roasting stick. Badger was strangely silent for a moment. Then the smile faded from his weathered old face. "I don't have to make 'em up. I know things that happened up here. True things that would send shivers up your spine." "Well," Adam coaxed, "like what?" There was another long pause. Only the sound of the crackling fire broke the stillness. "That mine?" Badger rasped and pointed to the black mountaintop silhouetted against the moonlit sky. 100 years ago, it was turning out enough silver to make everyone involved very wealthy. But it was a tough mine to work, so the owners paid top dollar to attract the toughest miners." He raised one eyebrow and looked from listener to listener. "They were a rough, rowdy lot, real troublemakers, but good miners nevertheless. There were plenty of brawls, but the men stuck together. Anyway, the owners may have paid well, but they skimped in another way. They were more concerned with relieving the mine of its silver ore than they were with the safety of the men. Everyone knew it would happen, and it finally did." "Everyone knew what would happen," Eli whispered. "One day old Mother Earth just couldn't take it no more, with the poking and digging. You could hear the main shaft groaning all the way in town. Then part of it just collapsed. Crash! No one working the east tunnel made it out. There were more than 24 men down there. Some people claim that for days afterward you could hear the sound of their cries from somewhere deep in the belly of the mine." Badger leaned in close to the wide-eyed boys. "Some people say that on a still night like tonight, if you listen real hard, you can still hear the victims of the disaster moaning, begging to be set free." "Wow," Jake gasped. "Didn't anybody try to help them?" "No." The harsh sound of Tim's voice startled the kids. Jake turned to see his counselor sitting a few feet from the fire. The flickering of the flames cast eerie shadows across Tim's face as he spoke. "They just left them there and said it was impossible to reach them. I suppose that if the vein of silver hadn't been running out, they might have found a way." Eli stared out into the night toward the abandoned mine. As if on cue, a coyote howled in the distance. "Have you ever heard them moaning?" he asked Badger. Tim interrupted. "No one has heard them moaning. It's just the sound of the wind in the empty tunnels." He gave Badger a stony look. "The dangers are very real, not supernatural." That night, as the boys in Red Wing prepared for bed, Scott asked Tim how he knew so much about the mine and why he seemed so angry about it. "I hate to admit it," the older boy said, "but last year I decided to find out about the mine for myself. So I did a little, exploring. I got lost and couldn't find the main entrance. It was just pure luck that I found another way out." "Weren't you scared?" Adam questioned. "Oh, sure. The wind really does howl up there. But it's just the wind. That's all. I got a few bumps and bruises, but everything turned out okay. But being in there made me really curious about what had happened to the miners, so afterward I read up on the disaster. It was a terrible thing for those men who had been deserted the way they were. They must have died horribly. I get angry just thinking about it." A dark look crept over Tim's face for a moment, then disappeared. "Look, I'll tell you what. Tomorrow we can all go for a hike up the mountain. I'll show you the main entrance." Charles shook his head. "Couldn't we get in trouble for that?" "Don't worry," Tim assured them. "We'll just take a look and come back. Aren't you curious? Besides, you'll be with me, and I guess I know the mine better than anybody." "Sure," Jake agreed. "What could happen?" The following morning had dawned drab and overcast. During the first part of the hike, the sun was vainly tried to break through, but now it was only a dull disk behind a curtain of clouds. A crisp wind had picked up too, and the tops of the tallest pine trees were nodding up and down. The sky really is dark over there, Eli pointed out to the west. It looks like a storm is heading this way. Maybe we should go back. No, Tim said confidently and kept walking. It'll probably just blow over. Happens all the time up here in the summer. We're almost to the mine anyway. Let's keep going. Within minutes, heavy drops of rain began to splat on the trail around them. Jake pulled a worn baseball cap out of his back pocket and slipped it on his head. I think Eli is right, he said. We don't want to get caught out here in a storm. As if in agreement, the sky lit up slightly, followed by an ominous roll of thunder. If we turn back now, we might make it back to camp before it hits. But nature had something else in mind. All at once, a blazing flash of lightning sizzled directly overhead, and a clap of thunder boomed like a cannon. The rain escalated to a downpour. Now what? Charles shouted above the fury. We have to take cover, Tim answered, trying to sound calm. He looked around. The closest place is the mine. We'll be safe there. The soil was rapidly turning to thick mud as rivulets of rushing water cascaded down the trail. The boys struggled to follow their counselor. Through the deluge, the opening to the mine loomed into view. It was black as coal and seemed to scar the hillside. In there? Scott hollered as water streamed down his face. You want us to go in there? It's the safest place, Tim barked back. I'm going in. Another bolt of lightning convinced everyone else to follow. Jake pulled out his flashlight and looked around at the tunnel. Geez, it's creepy in here, but at least it's kinda dry. Scott jumped. Did you hear that? What? Charles muttered. I didn't hear any. Wait! Jake cautioned. Scott's right! Listen! There was a slight rumbling sound overhead. It was getting louder. Get back! Jake bellowed. The unstable rain-sodden dirt and rock over the mine entrance gave way. The boys leaped away from the opening just in time before tons of debris quickly piled up, trapping them inside. When the movement stopped, Jake shined his light on the entrance. The boulders were far too big to move. The boys simply gazed at it, dumbfounded. What are we going to do? Adam whispered. Nobody knows we're up here. We're never going to get out. A second flashlight beam flared to life. It was Tim's. Don't worry, he said calmly. Remember what I told you. I've been here before. I know another way out. We just have to follow the old mine car tracks. He pointed the beam at a pair of iron rails that had been used to move mining cars, loaded with ore. The boys started to follow when an unearthly moan sounded from somewhere deeper in the tunnel. What was that? Scott said with a shudder. The wind, Tim assured him. Now let's go. The tunnel was littered with fallen boulders and timbers that had once been used to shore it up. The boys had to pick their way along slowly and carefully. Their only weapon against the oily blackness came from the two slim flashlight beams. Their only leads were the two slender rusted rails. It seemed that they had walked for nearly half an hour when suddenly the rails disappeared. In the circle of light, they could see that this part of the tunnel was partially flooded. The tracks vanished into the stagnant water. It's a natural ditch, Tim explained. It must have gotten flooded since I was here. But it isn't very wide. The tracks are supported by a trellis. Tim stopped as he noticed the worried faces of the campers. The only way across is to walk on the rails. They must be just below the surface. The boys were silent. Look, guys, we don't have a choice. I'll go first. I don't want to do this, Scott wailed. His whole body was shaking. Jake put the flashlight in the terrified boy's hands. We have to. He soothed, trying to keep his voice steady. Here, you take the light. It'll make you feel better. Once again, a mournful groan filled the tunnel. It's the timbers, Tim said firmly. Let's go. He stepped onto the slippery rail and started out into the water. One at a time, each boy followed. Jake was last behind Scott. They were only a few feet out when Scott began to wobble. There's something in the water, he cried. I felt something. It's got my ankle! Screaming, he lurched forward into Charles. Both boys toppled into the murky water. Jake watched in horror as they seemed to be sucked under by some force. The flashlight glowed under the water just long enough for Jake to be certain that he saw 3 flailing figures, not 2. Then it went out, and the splashing stopped. "Do something!" he yelled at Tim. "We've got to help them!" "There's nothing we can do," Tim said, almost without feeling. "Keep going. It's your only chance." Slipping and sliding, the youngsters sloshed forward. "We made it," Adam wheezed as they tumbled onto the soggy tunnel floor on the opposite side of the ghastly pool. "Don't stop now," Tim ordered. Eli stayed on the ground. "What about Scott and Charles?" "We can't help them," the older boy snapped. "We've got to save ourselves." Tim started down the tunnel. Reluctantly, Adam followed, then Jake. Eli was close behind. To keep from going crazy with fear, Jake listened to the steady crunch of Eli's footsteps in the gravelly soil. We will get out, he said to himself, over and over. Then he realized that he no longer heard footsteps behind him. "Eli?" Jake called out. No answer. Jake turned and called again louder. "Eli!" But his friend was gone. Jake twisted back to see the glow of Tim's flashlight disappear up ahead. He raced after him. Out of breath, he reeled around the corner into a wide chamber. From somewhere high above, an opening was letting in just enough daylight so that Jake could see that they were no longer alone. At least 24 wispy figures stood staring at him. "What are they?" murmured Adam. He was pressed up against the chamber wall. Some had horrible gashes all over their ghostly bodies. They looked like wounds that might have been suffered as an aging, unsafe tunnel crumbled in on them, crushing their frail human forms. Others were almost unmarked. The remnants of tattered flesh on their hands, however, was probably the result of uselessly trying to dig their way out of their grave a century before. Somehow, some hideous part of them had remained. "What's the matter, Jake? Cat got your tongue?" Scott stepped out from behind an outcrop of rock. Charles, too, stepped forward. Another voice added, "Don't tell me you aren't glad to see your dear friends." "Eli," Jake whispered. You might say that," Eli answered. He ran his hand over his own chest. "At least this is Eli's body. It feels so good to be warm again." Jake turned his gaze to Tim, who stood smiling down from a ledge leading to the opening above. "Tim, what is happening?" The older boy peered coldly at Jake and Adam and scowled. "Yes, Tim. It was so fortunate that he wandered in here. His body has been so useful. You see, it's the only way we can get out. We need vehicles, so to speak. Bodies, to be more accurate. Tim was the first, and now with this body, we can draw others here, just as we did with you. Soon, we will all be free of this horrible pit." The phantoms approached as Adam and Jake's screams filled the dark, dank tunnels. Tim started to laugh. "Goodbye for now," he said. Then he motioned to Eli, Scott, and Charles. Together, the phony counselor and his new cohorts scrambled out of the opening onto a trail leading back toward camp. The rain had stopped, and each of the beings gulped in deep breaths of sweet air. Moments later, what had once been Adam and Jake joined them. They looked at each other with knowing smiles and started back toward Camp Colby to recruit more boys for the next day's hike. I was not expecting possession to be an element in there. That was a nice treat. Let's see what you kids in the chat are saying. Firstly, thank you very much, Mr. Jeff McClellan, for your very generous tip. I do appreciate the tips. Definitely keep things rocking and a-rolling around here, and I really appreciate every single one of them, no matter how big or small, very, very much. Let's see what you guys are saying. Oh, and let's see if Ray Cersei has entered the chat yet. Let's see. Oh, here we go. Love summer camp stories. They're all dying. That was Tony Marr. He's not wrong. Morgan Moore said a summer camp that used to be a mining area. I am so in. And then Shane Migliavacca said, he said Shaft. Dwayne West said, hello, friend. Tuning in again for a night of spooky. Thank you, my friend, for joining us. Dwayne West said, sounds like a prequel to My Bloody Valentine. You know, a little bit with the mining. Tony Marr, at least they didn't blame the collapse on circus folk. Hashtag carniphobe. Yeah, really, the carny folk get a real raw deal in these books. Now, remember, guys, we need to keep track of what we're learning through all of the scary stories for sleepovers. This week so far, we've learned don't receive an inheritance, and we've learned don't go to summer camp. Although we've learned not to go to summer camp in earlier books too. Shane Migliavacca said that moaning is coming from Badger's tape collection. Woo! Okay, that was a good one. Morgan Moore, what could happen? Famous last words. Yep, those 3 sweet words. Dwayne West said, more children being killed. Harry Warden's back for revenge. Tony Marr said, man, they really took some liberties with Minor 69ers origin story. Morgan Moore said, so we have a combo of Sleepaway Camp, My Bloody Valentine, and Body Snatchers. Sold. Yeah, those are 3 tastes that taste great together, my friends. I didn't even think about that, but yeah, that was the thing with that story, and one of the things I've really enjoyed about reading all of these books, for those who are listening to this for the first time, this is the 9th, I believe, yeah, the 9th book in the series of scary stories for sleepovers that we have read. And they all bring something new to the table. We haven't been reading them in order. I've been reading them in a random order, although I am going to finish with number 10, the final one, because it's poetic, and also because it was really expensive, so I couldn't just buy it. You know, everybody had to help me buy it. But that was a pretty solid one. I liked it. I apologize. My throat's been a little funny today. I have allergies, and they have been really playing with my my sinuses, which just kind of messes with my throat. So, let's see. What say you, chat? Shall we start another story? Pinky's up. I'm gonna need a little bit of this. Ugh. Throat numbing spray is good stuff. All right. Well, let's do another story. This one, my friends, is called The Pact. The old woman rocked back and forth in her chair. Her eyes were not on the 3 little girls sitting at her feet, but on the dirt road that led toward the swamp. It devours snakes and gators whole, she was saying with her distinctive Cajun accent, and if you are brave enough to stay and listen, you can hear its victims, bones snapping like dried sticks. She paused. But Lakota prefers a meal of tasty human flesh. Char turned and looked toward the tops of the giant cypress trees that soared upward from the Louisiana bottomland. She knew that there were plenty of deer, wild turkeys, and even a black bear or 2 out there. But, according to legend, it was also the home of the gruesome man lizard, Lakota, that her grandmother was talking about. Make the noise it makes again, Gran, she begged. Char's grandmother pursed her lips and made a strange hissing noise, then followed it by clicking her tongue against the back of her teeth. Char and her friends Jennifer and Jamie each tried to imitate the sound, but they couldn't quite get it right. That is the sound of Lakota breathing in and out between his dagger-like fangs. It's the sound of his razor-edged scales snapping against one another as he slithers in search of prey. If you're unlucky enough to hear that, the old woman warned, Lakota is already close enough to have picked up your scent. Few people have been able to escape when Lakota isn't that near. The girls cringed in fear and delight. Mama, Char's mother stood at the open screen door with a scowl on her face. Don't you be scaring these babies with your silly tales. She turned to Jennifer and Jamie and smiled. Come on, girls. I promised your folks I'd drive you back to the base in time for dinner. In bed that night, Jamie strained to hear the sounds of the swamp through her open window. Her dad was a career military officer, so even though she was only 7 years old, she'd already lived in several different places. This one was her favorite, and Jennifer and Shar were her best friends ever. Jennifer's parents were also in the military, but Shar was a local. She was from a Cajun family that had lived on the bayou since the 18th century. Shar knew a lot about the swamp, and she'd shown Jennifer and Jamie some great stuff like the best place to search for tadpoles and crayfish, and how to spot a raccoon's nest. The girls called themselves the Three Musketeers. They even had a secret hiding place, a clearing about a half-mile into the swamp, where they would eat picnic lunches. Jamie wished she could stay in Louisiana forever. That was why the news she heard the following Saturday morning, that they were moving again, was so disheartening. "You'll make new friends," her mother soothed, "and you can write to Jennifer and Shar. Besides, I'm sure you'll like California." "I know," Jamie said sadly. It was her parents' fault that they had to move. There had been many changes on the base recently. Her dad said it was being downsized, and a lot of people were being transferred. In fact, later that day, Jamie learned that Jennifer, too, would be leaving. Only Shar would be left behind. The three girls sat sullenly in their secret meeting place, watching dragonflies buzz at the surface of the water. "Do you think we'll ever see each other again?" Jennifer finally asked with a sigh. "Of course we will," Shar said sharply. "If you want something badly enough, you can make it happen no matter what." She looked from one girl to the other. "But why don't we make sure?" "How can we do that?" Jamie questioned. Shar waded out into the muddy water and snapped 3 sharp spines from the trunk of a water locust tree. "We'll make a pact," she announced solemnly. "A blood pact." And with that, she poked the tip of one spine into her finger. A drop of bright red blood welled up. "Exactly 5 years from today, we will meet in this exact spot, no matter what," she continued, allowing the drop of blood to fall to the ground. As it seeped in, she handed Jamie and Jennifer each a spine. They each did as Shar had done. "Then it's settled," Shar said. "Friends forever. Nothing will stop us from being together on that day." "Friends forever," the others responded. 5 years later, standing on the back porch of her new home and looking out at the tops of the giant cypress trees, Jamie remembered the day she and her friends had made their sworn pact, as if it had only been yesterday. It was as though fate had been working to help the three girls keep their promise. Her dad had not expected the transfer back to Louisiana, but here they were, and only 1 week before the appointed time. Jamie wondered if Jennifer and Shar would be there, too. At first, the girls had kept in touch with each other by writing regularly. After a while, though, the letters had become fewer and farther between. In fact, it had been almost a year since she had heard from either of her friends. "Jamie?" a familiar voice said softly. Jamie turned to see Jennifer framed in the doorway. "I can't believe you're really here," Jennifer cried, running to her friend. The girls laughed and hugged each other. "My mom told me that your family had been transferred too," Jamie said. "How long have you been here? Have you seen Char?" "I've been here about a week," Jennifer answered, "but Char isn't here. I guess you didn't hear about the accident." "What accident?" "It happened about a year ago. Char's mom and grandmother were killed in a car accident. She was sent to live with a relative, a cousin, I think, in New York." "I'm so sorry," Jamie said mournfully, remembering how kind Char's family had been to her. "I'll miss them. Do you think Char's okay?" Jennifer shrugged. "It's been a long time, but maybe she'll be able to come back to meet us." Suddenly her face brightened. "I have an idea. Mrs. Willis is still at the post office. She would know how to reach Char. We could get an address where we could write to her and let her know we're back. We still have a week to go. Maybe she could get here. She said nothing would stop her." "Yeah," Jamie agreed. "I have to go to the post office with my mom today. I can write the letter and mail it." Finally, the time to fulfill their pact had come. Jamie glanced at her watch, then back to the picnic basket that she and Jennifer had prepared before making their way to the special clearing. There was a chill in the air and a light mist rose from the sun-warmed water. In the distance, a few bullfrogs were practicing their evening chorus. Finally, Jamie spoke. "We don't know if the letter even got there, Jen. I'm sure she would have been here if she could." She rose to her feet and put a hand on Jennifer's shoulder. "We shouldn't stay any longer. It'll be dusk soon. We haven't been out here in ages. I don't think I could find my way back in the dark without Char." Jennifer smiled. "Yeah, we wouldn't want to be stuck in this part of the swamp alone. Remember old Lakoti?" The girl said. Then she tried to imitate the funny hissing sound, clicking noise that Gran had made so convincingly. Jamie noticed the shadows lengthening on the ground as the sun crept closer to the horizon. "You still can't do that very well," she said, laughing, as she bent down to pick up the basket. Then, a soft sound broke the surrounding hush. It made Jamie stop laughing. It actually made her shudder. Jamie straightened up and looked at her friend. "Whoa, I'm really impressed. That was much better." But Jennifer was staring out over the swamp toward a shadowy grove of white oak and bald cypress trees. Lacy strands of Spanish moss hung from the branches and dangled into the water like cobwebs. "That wasn't me," Jennifer said with a tremor in her voice. "Oh, come on," Jamie began, but then stopped when she saw the look on her companion's face. "Let's get back," she murmured. The girls walked in silence for a few hundred yards. The mist was getting strangely thick and warm. Then suddenly they could go no further. A tall stand of vegetation that looked like feathery bamboo blocked their path. "Canebrake," Jamie muttered to Jennifer. "We must have made a wrong turn. I don't think we should try to work our way around it. In this mist, I can't tell how far back it goes." Before they could take another step, the strange hissing noise echoed over the water once again, followed by a series of clicks. It was closer than it had been before. "It's Lakoti," Jennifer moaned in terror. "He's picked up our scent." "Don't be ridiculous," Jamie countered, but she couldn't stop her hands from shaking. "It's a gator. Lakoti is..." But she didn't finish. Everything was eerily quiet. Even the bullfrogs had stopped croaking. Through the haze, she could barely make out a dark shadow rising from the swamp. The girls backed toward the canebrake as the form loomed closer, then seemed to disappear. The sound of something moving in the water broke the stillness. Something very big. The air smelled foul, and Jamie found it almost impossible to breathe. "Don't move at all," she said to Jennifer. "Maybe it'll..." "Ah!" Both girls screamed in horror as a huge creature leapt out at them in search of a foaming swamp water. At least 10 feet tall, it leered down at them with gleaming yellow eyes. Clumps of slime hung from its long, sickle-shaped claws. "Run!" Jamie shouted, pushing Jennifer ahead of her. Both girls sprinted in the direction from which they had come. Tripping over a protruding root, Jamie fell hard to the ground and rolled. The beast was close behind, howling in anger. Its huge mouth was lined with dripping fangs, and its long, forked tongue whipped around as it roared. It was almost on her. "Get up!" she heard Jennifer shriek. Then suddenly she felt something tugging at her arm. Scrambling to her feet, Jamie charged after her friend. Crashing into the clearing, the girls searched their surroundings from side to side in despair. "There's nowhere to go!" Jennifer cried. "This way!" someone yelled. The two girls snapped their attention to a small rise and saw Char motioning them on. "There's no time! Hurry!" Char shouted. In panic, the three girls clambered up the side of a small hillock and tumbled down the other side. The soggy ground shook beneath their feet as the bloodthirsty monster galloped after them. Char darted toward a tall stand of swamp red maple. The trees grew close together, and their gnarled roots and buttresses stuck out at all angles like knobby knees. "Lakoti's too big to follow us in here," Char gasped. Up their hips in a dark, murky pool, the girls held their breath and pressed themselves against the gray-green trunks. "Duck down as far as you can into the water," Char instructed. "That way Lakoti won't be able to pick up your scent." The girls did as they were ordered. Jamie felt her feet sinking in the muck. Something slick slithered along her leg, and she fought the impulse to scream. All at once, the nightmarish beast sloshed into view. Tiny waves splashed against her face and stung her eyes, but Jamie could see the creature swinging his way in that. It was so close that she could smell the stench of its fetid breath. Then, to her surprise, Lakoti bellowed in rage and headed deeper into the swamp. Shar made a silent sigh to the others not to move. As the thrashing of the creature faded away, she motioned for her friends to follow her. Without a word, the trio made their way out of the hellish swamp as quickly as their feet would carry them. Once back on the road toward the base, the shivering girls hugged each other in relief. "How did you..." When Jamie stammered at Char with trembling lips. "I said that nothing would stop me from being here," Char smiled. "I wouldn't let you two city kids fend for yourselves out in the swamp." Jennifer shook her head. "I never really thought that Lakoti existed. I still can't believe this happened. We've got to tell somebody. We've got to warn them." Char shook her head. "The people who live on this swamp know deep in their hearts that the legends are true. The others, well, you'll never convince them no matter what you say." She took Jennifer and Jamie's hands in her own. "You are my very best friends," Char continued. "The important thing is that you made it. No one else ever has to know what happened here." Jamie nodded. "You're right. This'll be our secret. We can talk about it more tomorrow. Right now, I'd like to go home and get out of these wet clothes." "Friends forever?" Char asked. "Friends forever," Jamie and Jennifer answered. At home, Jamie slipped off her soggy shoes and snuck quietly in through the kitchen door. She was sure she would never be able to give her parents a believable explanation about why she was soaked to the bone. Tiptoeing through the front hall, she noticed a letter addressed to her on the hall table. It had Char's return address in New York on it. Jamie picked up the envelope and padded to her room. She slipped out of her wet clothes and into a bathrobe. Then she pulled out the letter. "I guess Char wanted to let us know she was coming," she thought, tearing it open. She read a line or two and then drew in her breath sharply. The envelope slipped to the floor. The letter was from Char's cousin. It was short and matter-of-fact. Jamie stared at the last lines. "The accident occurred 3 months ago. It was such a terrible shock so soon after the similar deaths of her mother and grandmother. If it's any comfort, she was killed instantly and certainly did not suffer. If there's anything else," the letter continued, but Jamie could no longer read through her tears. Char had truly meant it when she said nothing would stop her from being there on their appointed day. Not even the grave. "Yes, Char," Jamie sobbed. "Friends forever." Oh, that one was sweet. We actually got a sweet one. It had been a long while since we got like a sweet ghost story. A really long while, actually. And we actually got like a sweet ghost story. Man, it has been a really long time. Let's see what you guys are saying. I'll get a little bit of agua. Thank you very much for your tip, Keith Tomlin. I do appreciate it. Let's see what you kids are saying in the chat. Phil Herman said, "Love it." Thank you. Tony Marr, "Blood packs, the perfect way to stay friends." Well, apparently it worked. Tony Marr said, "Lacoste versus the folk monster. Who would win?" Now that's a battle I would pay to watch. Lakoti versus the folk monster. I mean, that sounds like two great tastes that taste great together. All right, let's see. Rebecca Randolph said that was really good. I liked that one. That's the thing, man. I keep saying it. We've read so many of these books. You can't get too comfortable and assume you know where they're going to go, because then they do stuff like that. That was a nice kind of traditional ghost story. And somehow no kids died, which has become more and more unusual in these books. Shane Migliavacca said, "Cool ending," right? I didn't see that one coming even a little bit. I was expecting, because I get cocky and assume, I was expecting it to turn out that, that Char was the Lakoti, or that the Lakoti had killed her family, or something along those lines. I was definitely not expecting it to turn out that Char was a ghost who was still looking out for her friends beyond the grave because good friends keep their promises. Keith Tomlin, by the way, his comment was, you don't have to run faster than the creature, you only have to run faster than your friend. So, I mean, Keith Tomlin knows all about, the trials and tribulations of friendship. So, all right, my friends, let's do another one. Depending on how my throat's doing, we might do 2 more. This might be the last one of the night. I'm not sure yet. My throat is really, it's gravelly tonight. So, let's see what we got. Ooh, okay. So some titles, I feel like tell me exactly what's going to happen and then I'm wrong. And then some titles, I just have no guesses. This story, I got no guesses. This story is called By Any Means. Sasha stood defiantly in front of Robbie. "You pushed me in front of the ball," she said angrily. "Get real," the accused boy said, gloating. "You jumped right in front of it. The name of the game is dodgeball. You got hit, so you're out." "But you cheated, Robbie Jefferson," she whined again. "So what else is new?" called a kid on the sidelines as he elbowed his buddy. "I'd be really surprised if he didn't cheat." The other children laughed. Robbie also smiled as if he had been given a compliment. "The idea," she informed them, "is to win. How you win is not important." The bell rang and all the kids filed into Mr. Juarez's classroom. As Robbie and the other kids took their seats, Mr. Juarez placed small stacks of papers on each desk in front of them. Then he instructed the person sitting at the desk to take a paper and pass the rest back. "Okay, settle down," he ordered. "We're going to have a quiz today on the King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table story we read." A low groan rumbled across the class. As soon as everyone had a test paper, Mr. Juarez gave the signal to begin. Nearly 20 minutes, the class was quiet, except for the scratch of pencils and the occasional rub of an eraser, as each child answered the questions. Cautiously, Robbie wriggled in his chair until he was able to see the paper of the boy in front of him. Julian was a straight-A student, and Robbie never missed an opportunity to take advantage of the seating arrangements. "Cut it out," Julian whispered hoarsely as Robbie eventually leaned closer to get a better look. "Come on," Robbie coaxed. "What's the difference?" In answer, Julian hunched forward over his quiz, blocking the other boy's view. After class, Robbie stopped Julian near the bike rack. "You're a real jerk," he said. "I don't see how it can hurt you if I get a couple of answers off your test." "It hurts everybody," Julian shot back angrily. Several kids paused to listen to the argument. "But especially you. You'll never learn anything that way." Robbie grinned smugly. "My dad said I could go to the county fair this weekend if I got an A in English. That's what really matters." Julian shook his head. "You may think you're getting away with something, Robbie, but you're going to end up looking like a fool, just like King Arthur's court jester." The next day, Mr. Juarez handed back the graded tests. The day after that, Robbie cornered Julian outside. "So what do you think now, genius?" Robbie said with a smirk. He waved a ticket to the fair in Julian's face. "I still think you're a fool," Julian replied. Everyone had looked forward to the opening of the county fair for weeks. It had everything. There were special exhibitions, pie-eating contests, pig races, and a haunted house. There were rides, too, including the county's tallest Ferris wheel and a roller coaster known as the Bone Crusher. Robbie and his friends, Josh and Ted, spent much of their time on the midway. Now, with evening setting in, the game booths were all lit up with flashing colored lights. For a quarter, you could try your luck at popping balloons with darts or tossing baseballs at milk bottles. If you did well enough, you could win a really cool prize. Robbie had his heart set on winning a laser sword. It was a big plastic saber that glowed dull yellow in the dark and made a neat whistling sound when you raised it over your head. He had already spent $5 in quarters in his quest for the prize when he saw Julian and a few of his friends making their way through the crowd. Robbie was about to turn away when something grabbed his attention. Tucked under Julian's belt was a laser sword. "So, where'd you steal the sword?" Robbie challenged as he and his friends swaggered over to the group of kids. Julian narrowed his eyes for a moment, then answered calmly. I won it, fair and square. I know that's hard for you to understand, but what's so great about winning a dumb sword? Robbie interrupted. He turned to Ted and snickered. A 2-year-old could win one of those. So why don't you have one yet? Sasha asked. I'm planning on winning something much better, Robbie boasted. I'll believe it when I see it, Julian scoffed. Robbie was getting furious. Okay, how about if we have a contest? Let's meet back here in an hour and we'll see who has won the best prize. The loser pays $10. He held up a $10 bill. Your sword doesn't count because you already have it. The contest has to start from now. Julian frowned. I can't. My folks are expecting me home in 30 minutes. I thought so, Robbie said, sneering. You're afraid I'll beat you. No way. I accept the challenge if we do it tomorrow. You're on, Robbie said, offering his hand. Shake on it. The boys shook hands. As Robbie and his friends walked away, Josh gave him a disgusted look. Are you crazy? You haven't won anything yet, and you tried all afternoon. How are you going to win this stupid bet? Robbie scowled. It wasn't important enough before. Now it is. I always find a way to get what I want. Yeah, we all know how you usually win, but it's going to be hard to cheat on this one, Ted pointed out, gesturing toward the midway. None of the bozos in those booths are going to just give you a big prize. Robbie whirled around and glared at his friends. Look, jerk, I said I'd do it and I can do it without you. Why don't you just get lost? Without another word, Josh and Ted stormed away. Robbie stood alone on the bright, gaudy midway as a happy crowd milled around him, but he wasn't in the mood to smile. His friends were right. Slowly, he started to move away from the throng and toward the softly lit side exit. Hey, kid, someone called from the shadows beside what appeared to be an empty booth. Robbie peered into the darkness but couldn't see anyone. Lowering his gaze, he took another step. Hey, kid, wait! A tall, thin man stood half in and half out of the light. He was dressed like a clown, but the expression on his face was more sinister than funny. I couldn't help but overhear your problem, and I can help. How can you help? Robbie said rudely. I have something for you. Something you want. The man pulled on a cord which raised a curtain in the darkened booth. Robbie's eyes opened wide. There was a lavish display of toys. Stuffed unicorns and dragons with glittering eyes, magnificent models of armored knights on horses, and in the center of it all was an incredible toy sword. It glowed with its own silvery light, and gems of different colors winked on its hilt. I can assure you that you will win the prize of your choice here tomorrow, in full view of your friends, if... The man hesitated, making sure that he had Robbie's attention. If what? Robbie asked impatiently. It's quite simple. On either side of this booth, there are gates that lead to a maze. All you have to do is enter the first gate, then make your way through the maze before the second gate closes, and you win. How can I be sure that I'll make it? And what's in it for you? The man stroked a small goatee on his chin. Let's just say I enjoy the sport of it, he said. I like to play the game. Meet me here tonight at midnight, and I'll let you try the maze for yourself. That'll give you an advantage over the others. That's cheating, Robbie said, smiling. Perhaps it is, said the man. Perhaps it is. Sneaking out of his house was easy for Robbie, and it wasn't any harder to climb over the chain-link fence that surrounded the fairgrounds. He dropped quietly to the ground and rose to his feet. It all looked very different now. There were no bright lights. There was no music blaring. The booths were closed with wooden shutters and secured with heavy padlocks. Listening to the sound of his own footsteps as he crept down the darkened midway, Robbie began to think that this wasn't such a good idea. All of a sudden, the lights on the carousel flared to life. The music began to play and the splendid horses bobbed up and down as the huge machine started to turn. Rooted to the spot, Robbie watched in alarm as the strange carnival man came into view. He was holding on to one of the brass rails. With a wicked grin, he leapt to the ground and bowed to the boy. Welcome, the man said, dramatically. The carousel immediately dimmed and the music ground slowly to a halt. How'd you do that? Robbie asked in astonishment. The man winked. An old carnival trick. Come, It's time for our little game. Robbie remained silent and followed the stranger to the open gate at the mouth of the maze. When he finally spoke, his voice faltered. I've been thinking, this is kind of weird. No, it's too weird. I don't think I want to do it after all. But you have so much to gain, the man hissed. All you have to do is make it through the maze. He gave the boy a sharp push and slammed the iron gate shut. Robbie twisted around and threw himself at the closed entryway. And if I don't make it? He called out, his voice shaking. What happens if I don't make it? The man's answer seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. Why then, of course you'll stay. Forever. Horrible laughter rose all around the terrified boy, now pounding at the door. No! Let me out! Screamed Robbie. You're wasting precious time, the man said. Then all was silent. Fearfully, Robbie turned and studied the dark passageway ahead. Calm down, Robbie, he told himself under his breath. This guy's just a wacko. He held out his hands and groped along side by side. The passage separated into two different paths, and he chose to turn to the right. All I have to do is follow the wall, and everything will be... Ah! Robbie howled as the ground dropped from under his feet. He felt himself falling, then he came to a sudden stop that knocked the air out of his lungs. Catching his breath, Robbie saw that he was in a cavern that was lit by a reddish glow. He stood warily and looked around. Why is it so warm in here? He muttered. The wide passageway curved away to the left where Robbie saw an opening in the opposite wall. With mounting terror, he dashed toward it. All at once the floor of the cavern shook beneath his feet. It was then that he realized he wasn't walking on dirt and stone. He was walking on something alive. First, one huge snake-like head rose high into the air and swayed above him. Then another. Each head had fiery red slits for eyes, and each open mouth housed gleaming, needle-sharp fangs. The first head struck at him, and Robbie rolled out of range. Without hesitation, he jumped to his feet and raced for the opening. He dove into it just as the second head released a burst of searing flame. At first, Robbie slid helplessly along, then the passage leveled out, and he found himself at a fork in the maze. Knowing that there wasn't much time left, he sprinted to his left and slammed into something. Reeling from the crash, he looked up into a nightmare. An eyeless skull grinned at him. The skeletal body was encased in a rustling suit of armor, and the thing held a huge silvery sword in its fleshless hand. Beyond the phantom, farther down the passage, Robbie could see a glow. It was the gate. Its iron hinges squeaked ominously. It began to swing shut. No! Robbie wailed. He charged at the ghastly sentinel, and it raised its sword high, leaving a small, unprotected gap on one side of the passage. Robbie's legs felt as if they were on fire, but he aimed for the tiny avenue of escape just as the sword came whistling toward him. I could have told you Robbie wouldn't come. He was just too chicken to show up, Sasha declared while opening a fresh package of cotton candy. He knew he couldn't win the bet fairly. Why don't we just go ride the Bone Crusher? You're right, Julian nodded. Robbie is such a fool. As the kids walked away, an odd-looking man with a small goatee on his chin chuckled to himself while he hung a large stuffed toy for display in his booth. Right you are. The man laughed aloud, adjusting the costume of his new jester doll. Right you are. Looking remarkably like Robbie, the jester's face had a foolish-looking painted-on smile, but its unseeing eyes were forever frozen in an expression of horror. Man, we got some more carny-sploitation going on here, guys. I don't know, something must be in the air. So let's see what you guys are saying. Need a little bit of water. Whew. Oh, okay. All right. Shane Migliavaca said, cheaters never end up good in these stories, and he is right. Tony Marr said, here we go, back to blaming the carnies. Morgan Moore, I feel like this could have been avoided if this kid went to Dollar Tree. That is so true, Morgan. Shane Migliavaca said, hunting kids? Almost, sort of, not quite. Tony Marr, never make a deal with a carny. That's how I lost my pinky toe. You can't trust carnies. Small hands. Shane Miglevaka said, dang these carnies. And then Tony Marr said, full disclosure, I do social media videos for the largest fair in Ohio. I think I am a carny. Oh, if you were a carny, you'd know, my friend. All right, my friends. I think I'm going to call it a night for tonight. My throat is starting to hurt a little bit. I'm super tired. I had to get up really early because I had an electrician come out and do some work. And then, unrelated, the electrician had to, the electrician left. And then an hour later, a guy knocks on my door to let me know they're shutting the power off on my block. So I had no power for like half the day. So I wasn't able to get a lot of work done. I'm super tired. But I really appreciate you guys hanging out with me. And I want to mention, I didn't see Ray Cersei in the chat, but Ray, if you're watching this after the fact, have a very happy birthday this Friday. I always appreciate your support. I always appreciate your comments in the chat, and I just hope you have a great birthday. So everybody, please have yourselves a great rest of the week. I will be back next Wednesday with more, well, even more scary stories for sleepovers. So until next time, my friends, please, please stay safe, stay sane, and stay scared.